Hello and welcome to the Beautiful Things channel. Today I'm going to show you another way to use up all those pesky fabric scraps to create new fabric to make wonderful things. I'm going to be making a pair of oven gloves as an online tutorial for the members of our sewing club, but I thought it would be really nice to use a kind of quilted fabric. But instead of buying quilted fabric, I've used up my scraps to create this beautiful piece of fabric which I can then cut my oven glove out of. Now all I've used is strips of scrap fabric. I actually have this huge box of strips. These have all been ripped up from scrap fabric. I think the intention was to make a string bowl with them at some point and I never got around to it. So you can see they're just random strips. They're all a bit crinkly and fluffy because they have just been torn. So what I did is I just took a handful of them and I gave them a quick press with the iron just to smooth them out so they were slightly easier to use. So I've got my little bundle here of pressed strips. And I've got a piece of wadding. Now for the oven gloves, if you're going to make them, I would suggest you use a heat resistant wadding. I don't have any here, so I'm just going to use just some plain wadding just to show you. Just a piece of batting, and this piece is large enough for me to cut my oven glove out of. I'm going to take my strips and my wadding over to the sewing machine. So I've got my piece of wadding and I'm going to take my first strip and I'm going to lay it down so the raw edge is on the right side of my wadding, and I'm just going to run a really narrow seam allowance down the edge just to hold it in place. This is probably like 1/8, and I'm not pinning or clipping, I'm just moving the fabric in line. I'm just going to come all the way down to the bottom of my wadding. Or until I run out of strip, whatever comes first. Okay, so that's attached on the right hand side, so it's loose here. I'm just going to smooth that out. Then I'm going to take my next strip and I'm going to place it right sides together along the unsewn edge. So my two fabric pieces are now right sides together. And I'm actually going to use the left hand edge of my presser foot just lined up against that raw edge, which is going to give me a rough 1/4 inch seam allowance. And I'm just going to stitch all the way down, and as I go I'm just manipulating that fabric so that those two raw edges are touching each other. And then when I open that fabric back out, you can see you've got a nice seam there. So you can just finger press that seam. And then I just take my scissors and just cut away that little excess bit down there. Then I'm going to take my next strip, and again I'm just going to be laying it right sides down onto the piece that I've just sewn, and stitching down this raw edge so that when it opens up, again, it will just keep adding lovely strips of fabric. And then I can cut off the extra just so it doesn't get in the way. Open that back out and again finger press it. And I'm going to keep adding strips in this way until I've covered my entire piece of wadding. Once you've completely covered your wadding, it's time to do a little bit of quilting. And I'm going to start by stitching down this raw edge. This is the final piece that I attached. So I'm just going to base this down in place to stop it from flapping around. So I'm just going fairly close to my raw edge. And then I'm going to quilt my fabric. Now you could put some decorative stitches onto your machine, do a bit of free motion quilting. You could go all over it with a zigzag stitch. You could do stripes, whatever you fancy really, just to quilt this fabric to the wadding a little bit more. Or you can just leave it as is. At the end of the day, it is securely attached and it is a nice texture as it is, but I'm just going to run some stitch lines 1/8 away from each of my seams, and I think that just looks really quite nice. And I just use the lines on my presser feet just to be able to get a rough line, and I follow that, and I follow the seam down the line of my presser foot just here, which means I'm stitching about 1/8 away from my seam line. I've put my stitch length up to a 3, so it's going to be a fairly quick job. And when I get to the end, rather than cutting my threads, what I actually do is make sure my needle's down, lift up my presser foot, pivot my fabric round, sew over 1/8 across the other side of the seam, and then just turn my fabric round and come back down the other side. So I'm basically just going to do a giant zigzag all the way across my fabric, but it means I don't have to cut any ends. So I've stitched 1/8 of an inch either side of that seam, and again I'm just going to turn my work. It gets a bit messy at the ends, but that doesn't matter. You're not going to be using that bit of fabric. Just come down and work your way down the other side. So I'm literally just sewing either side of each line, but it's up to you how you quilt your fabric, or if you quilt it at all. So I hope you enjoyed that super quick little tutorial, and it's another way to use up all of those pesky fabric scraps. I know all of my fabric scrap tutorials have been super popular so far, so I thought it was about time we did another one. If you enjoyed watching, please do give it a big thumbs up, leave me a comment down below, and if you haven't subscribed to the channel already, then please do. I upload content on average 3 times a week, and I really love to chat to you in the comments, so I will do my best to reply to you if I can. Thank you very much for watching. I will see you again soon. Bye.